Thank you, Charlie, for inviting me, and thank you all for coming. I'm fascinated to hear what others have to say about contemporary neuroscience's findings about creativity and what that can tell us about Shakespeare. I know nothing about neuroscience. I know a certain amount about Shakespeare. And I'm going to start by talking about how Shakespeare's age thought about the brain, thought about specifically the matter of thinking, about the potentially transformative effects of thought. Now, for Shakespeare, to some extent, and there will be some qualifications on the way, there always are, the mind is free to make its own world. And that has to do with a number of key factors that I want to talk about. Firstly, there's the idea that thinking is a kind of transitive operation that changes the nature of the phenomena that you think about. And that's partly based on another factor, a sense of real doubt and uncertainty in Shakespeare's age as to how the world actually worked. The old model of scientific order in the cosmos had rather fallen apart, but the new modern scientific synthesis associated with Newton, etc., had not yet emerged. That meant that people were freer to play with ideas, to have opinions which might transform the world and which might imaginatively suggest that the world operates in ways radically different from the ways that had been thought before. The transitive power of thought is also partly based on the idea, treated with some skepticism in the period, and this is the point on which I want to conclude my talk a little later, the idea that man was a microcosm, that man in some ways contained the whole universe within himself, and therefore was able to transform the world from within. There's also, in Shakespeare's age, a certain relativism about thought. And this has to do with the educational model of the time, which encouraged people to always be able to argue both sides of the question, to argue, as the Latin phrase puts it, in utramque partem, on either side of the question. And finally, the relationship between the self and the world was mediated by a persistent opposition in the thinking of the time between the human will and the human reason. The will, which was thought to be fallen, the will or the passions which were thought to be fallen, and the intellect or reason, which was thought to be unfallen. This pattern, I'm going to suggest, allows for a certain transformative mutual give and take between mind and world, which is very different from Cartesian dualism. Now, all of that seems rather wordy and complicated, and let's see how Shakespeare himself deals with it. But before we do, I want just to introduce an idea which was floating around in Shakespeare's time, an idea, the first passage on the handout that I've handed around, from Marsilio Ficino's Platonic Theology, written in the late 15th century. Ficino argues that the intellect is united with things by transforming them into itself. So the intellect transforms the things that it thinks about into its own terms. The unfallen intellect can apprehend the world and translate it into its own unfallen terms. The will, on the contrary, is united with things by transforming itself into the things. So the will, when you desire something, you start to become like the thing you desire. If you desire a piece of cake, presumably you become a piece of cake. Certainly in some of the literature of this period, there's a worry that desiring women, for example, makes one womanly. So to desire something is to turn yourself into the thing that you desire. Your mind is somehow brought down to the level of the thing that you desire. And we'll see how that works in one of Shakespeare's sonnets. So what we see here is this give and take between mind and world, this sense that the mind transforms the world transforms the mind, depending on whether you're using the intellect or whether you're using your will in order to interact with the world. Now, one of Shakespeare's most famous statements on the idea of the transformative power of thought is the idea that there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. Now, this, of course, is not Shakespeare's idea, it's Hamlet's. Everything that we quote from Shakespeare is always in the voice of a character. It's always an argument that he's trying out rather than something that he necessarily fundamentally believes. And the relativism of that thought chimes with something written in the same year as Hamlet. John Donne, at the end of his great poem about transmigration of souls, metempsychosis, argues that there's nothing simply good or ill alone, as the second passage on the handout has it. Of every quality, comparison, the only measure is and judge opinion. Only the human mind is able to register and give value to things. And this is a thought that's repeatedly worked out in Shakespeare. And we'll think about how some of this line of thought leads into some rather interesting and creative complications and contradictions. But the first passage I want to focus on in depth, transforming the world through feedback loops. The first passage I want to look at in depth is from Hamlet. Hamlet's exchange with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. There's a sweet spot where I can stand and not. It's about here, isn't it? Stay still. I could be bounded in a nutshell and think myself king of infinite space, were it not that I have bad feedback. So Hamlet says to his university friends, Denmark's a prison. And Rosencrantz responds, then is the world one? A goodly one in which there are many confines, wards and dungeons, Denmark being one of the worst. We think not so, my lord. Why then 'tis none to you, for there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. To me it is a prison. Then your ambition makes it one. 'Tis too narrow for your mind. Oh God, I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself a king of infinite space, were it not that I have bad dreams. Which dreams indeed are ambition, for the very substance of the ambitious is merely the shadow of a dream. A dream itself is but a shadow. Truly, and I hold ambition of so airy and light a quality that it is but a shadow's shadow. Then are our beggars' bodies, and our monarchs and outstretched heroes the beggars' shadows. Shakespeare loves the image of shadows. He's fascinated by them. He uses the image of the shadow not just to represent what we think of as a shadow, but also images in a mirror, and thereby the idea of dramatic representation is a kind of shadow play, a shadowing of some real world. And he refers to actors as shadows. At the end of A Midsummer Night's Dream, we're asked to forgive if we shadows have offended, and that's not just the fairies of A Midsummer Night's Dream, but the actors themselves. They are to be thought of as shadows, as in Macbeth's "Life's but a walking shadow." So Shakespeare likes this idea of dramatic representation as a shadow. But what does Hamlet mean in this final passage? Well, he seems to suggest that because beggars can imagine being kings, and the imagination is a shadow, the beggar is the true body, the true thing in the world, and the king or hero whom the beggar may dream of being is merely a shadow, lacking substance. So to be a king is a purely imaginary thing for Shakespeare. A purely imaginary, at least as Hamlet is concerned. And thought transforms the world. One's imagination transforms the world. Hamlet could imagine himself to be a king of infinite space, even if he were bounded in his nutshell. But his bad dreams prevent this, his dreams which make him want to move beyond the confined world in which he finds himself. The imagination then transforms the world in which one takes part. And Shakespeare himself in the sonnets thinks further about this. And if anywhere Shakespeare's own voice in some ways comes out in the sonnets, though we have to be very careful about attributing this directly to Shakespeare, and we perhaps need to think of this as being Shakespeare's own persona in the sonnets. Nonetheless, the sonnets were published in 1609 with Shakespeare's name on them, saying Shakespeare's sonnets. So to some extent, the speaker of these sonnets is Shakespeare himself. And in this sonnet, he's in all probability writing to the addressee of most of the early sonnets, the young man who appears to be a young, wealthy man whom Shakespeare is friends with, or perhaps slightly more than friends. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy contented least. Yet, in these thoughts myself almost despising, haply I think on thee, and then my state, like to the lark at break of day arising from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings. The speaker of the sonnet here then manages to move from complete abjection and envy of everybody else to a sense of being beyond a king, simply by the pure bootstrapping exercise of thought. He starts off feeling himself in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes. His objective condition is very low. He's solitary. Heaven even won't listen to him. His cries are bootless, that is, useless. He then starts in the second quatrain of the sonnet to envy various others, wishing that he was like one more rich in hope, wishing he had features like someone else, wishing he was someone popular, wishing he had greater art, a great irony on Shakespeare's part, and wishing that he had someone else's range of abilities, someone else's Renaissance man skills. Now, so he's envying various types of person. But in the flattering process of the sonnets, the young man of the sonnets might be imagined to have all of these properties, to be rich in hope, to be handsome, to be popular, to be a great artist, to have a great range of capacities. So even while he pretends to be envying various different people, he's starting to put together a picture of the young man of the sonnets, whom he loves. And having put that picture together through envy, he is then able to focalize all of his disparate, disjointed thoughts into his thoughts of the young man. Haply, I think on thee. Haply by chance, but also luckily, but also happily. He thinks on the young man whom he has tracked through these various thoughts, whom he has put together with these various properties that others may have. And then suddenly his state, that is his objective condition within the world, becomes completely transformed. He's able to lift himself up in those brilliant lines, like to the lark at break of day arising from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. No longer troubling deaf heaven with his bootless cries, he can celebrate his state, he can celebrate his transformation. Like Hamlet, he's been able to, like Hamlet wishes he could, counting himself a king of infinite space, he's able to escape from his objective state and condition into a condition where he has all possibilities. Of course, this isn't a permanent transformation for Hamlet. The sonnets record the ability of thought to transform you in a moment. It's like to the lark at break of day arising. Yes, there's a sense of optimism, but there is also a sense of an optimism only at one particular moment. Thought, then, can only change your state, perhaps provisionally, perhaps for a moment, but it can't transform one's entire life. That's not to say that it invalidates the idea of the transformative power of thought, but it does suggest that the transformative power of thought doesn't allow for any kind of permanent changes within the world, and we'll look further at how that works. Coming back to Hamlet, though, turning the page on the handout, Hamlet registers something of the culture of doubt at in his time. And he registers this in rather a curious way. He doesn't actually speak these lines. They are lines from his dreadful poem to Ophelia, which are mocked by Polonius and co. When Polonius is trying to persuade the king that Hamlet's problem is caused by love. Hamlet's little poem says, "Doubt thou the stars afire, doubt that the sun doth move, doubt truth to be a liar, but never doubt I love." Now, anyone who's read or watched Hamlet is in a position distinctly to doubt whether Ophelia is really Hamlet's great love object. I think we can distinctly doubt virtually everything about Hamlet's attitude to Ophelia. Just as we can doubt whether the stars are fire. Just as we can doubt whether the sun doth move. Just as, fundamentally, we can doubt truth to be a liar. The problem in Shakespeare's age was that new ideas about how the universe operated meant that virtually everything was in doubt. As John Donne put it, again, John Donne seems quite often to be chiming with Shakespeare, new philosophy calls all in doubt. For Hamlet, the time is out of joint. For Donne, the universe has fallen out of joint. They use exactly the same image. The universe has started to collapse. People aren't sure about the pre-existing order in the universe. Things have become subject to the play of opinion as opposed to the rigid certainty that had previously, or at least they thought previously, held in relation to how the universe worked. And this means that the culture of this time is deeply anxious about whether the properties of a thing really inhere in the thing itself or merely in the play of thought and opinion. In Troilus and Cressida, Ulysses tells Achilles, and this is the next passage, "No man is the lord of anything, though in and of him there be much consisting, till he doth communicate his parts to others. Nor doth he of himself know them for aught, till he behold them formed in the applause where they are extended, who like an arch reverberate the voice again, or like a gate of steel fronting the sun receives and renders back his figure and his heat. No man is the lord of anything. No one has fundamental possession of even their own qualities. Those qualities exist wholly in others' minds. Others' applause provide an echo chamber or a kind of mirror for one's own qualities, which validate those qualities, without which those qualities would not fundamentally exist. So the world then can be transformed by thought. But the argument that thought does transform the world radically is problematic in a number of ways. Firstly, it's self-undermining in this rather complicated sense. If you think that thought can transform how the world really works, then you can also think that thought does not transform the world, and that makes that so too. Thinking, to put it another way, can change the world, but can also change the nature of thinking. There's a mutual problem here, which is then worked through in certain other passages in Shakespeare, where thinking has less power to transform or mutate the world. In As You Like It, Rosalind has been spending the last few days pretending to be Rosalind. This is a similar sort of standard Shakespearean trick. Rosalind, pretending to be Ganymede, pretending to be a boy, has been hanging out every day with her beloved Orlando, pretending to be herself. Pretending to be Ganymede, pretending to be Rosalind. But at a certain point, this kind of play acting starts to fall apart. And as the play comes to its conclusion, as Orlando sees that his brother is going to be happy in love, he's run out of patience with the idea of playing this game with Ganymede, Rosalind. And she asks him, "Why then, tomorrow, can I not serve your... why then tomorrow, I cannot serve your turn for Rosalind? I can no longer live by thinking." Thinking, then, the transformative power of thinking, can only last you so long, can only do you so much good. In the final analysis, you need to return to the real. And a similar argument is set up in Richard II, where John of Gaunt, talking to his son, Bolingbroke, who has just been exiled from the kingdom, tries to cheer Bolingbroke up, telling him, and this is the next passage on the handout, "Think not the king did banish thee, but thou the king. Woe doth the heavier sit where it perceives it is but fairly born." Interesting moment there. Woe doth the heavier sit where it perceives it is but fairly born. Woe doth the heavier sit where it perceives that it is but faintly born, but faint-heartedly born is what is suggested here. Woe sits more heavily when that is, woe perceives that it is being born faint-heartedly. And that's an interesting thought. The idea that woe itself has the capacity to perceive things, the idea that an emotion can perceive, is something very typical of Shakespeare's language, whereby the inner faculties and the inner emotions of individuals are treated as having the capacity for thought of their own, the capacity for perception. This isn't just a linguistic matter, I would suggest, but rather a suggestion that the body is made up of a variety of competing passions which challenge the intellect and which the intellect must try and work with or against, depending on the circumstances. So Gaunt goes on. "Go, say I sent thee forth to purchase honour." He's being told to lie to himself. You've not been exiled. You've been sent off by your son to go and by your father to go and get honour on the continent. "Go, say I sent thee forth to purchase honour, and not the king exiled thee. Or suppose devouring pestilence hangs in our air, and thou art flying to a fresher clime. Look what thy soul holds dear. Imagine it to lie in that way thou goest, not whence thou comest. Suppose the singing birds, musicians, the grass whereon thou treadst, the presence strode." Presence here refers to the presence chamber of the monarch. So he's to imagine his exile in the natural world as being an alternative to the world of the court. "The flowers, fair ladies, and thy steps no more than a delightful measure or a dance. For gnarling sorrow hath less power to bite the man that mocks at it and sets it light." So here's a sort of stoical bit of advice from father to son. Imagine that you're going off not into exile, but on a journey for pleasure. But Bolingbroke responds, clearly having little patience with this notion. "Oh, who can hold a fire in his hand by thinking on the frosty Caucasus, or cloy the hungry edge of appetite by bare imagination of a feast, or wallow naked in December snow by thinking on fantastic summer's heat? Oh no, the apprehension of the good gives but the greater feeling to the worse. Fell sorrow's tooth doth never rankle more than when he bites, but lanceth not the sore. So here we've got the argument on both sides of the question. And I think that Bolingbroke's more convincing at this point. Both are quite convincing, but Bolingbroke seems in some ways to put more into his lament. How is this to be resolved then? How is this tension between the idea that you can think yourself into a better objective condition, or that you simply can't, that in fact thinking about good things in a bad condition makes things worse? Well, the passage goes on. If we flick over the page, Gaunt says, with slightly less convincing rhetoric, "Come, come, my son, I'll bring thee on thy way." Okay, well, fine, let's get going. "Had I thy youth and cause, I would not stay." Here he's making a personal argument. Well, if I were you, I would just buck up. Here the argument about the transformative power of thought has given way to a much more personal argument, which is just, be a man like your father, be a man, my son. And Bolingbroke decides, okay, well, he's got to go, so he might as well make the best of it. "Then England's ground, farewell. Sweet soil, adieu. My mother and my nurse that bears me yet. Where'er I wander, boast of this I can, though banished, yet a true-born Englishman." Resounding sentiment. Exit. Everybody cheers because it's a nice patriotic sentiment. Yes, we can quote this at the moment because it makes us all feel cheery and patriotic, etc., etc. Poor old Bolingbroke, going off being a true-born Englishman who needs to go to Europe. However, he comes back. He takes with him the thought that he is an Englishman. And when he comes back, he decides to take the throne off Richard II, who has exiled him. Even if his father's consoling thoughts at this moment, then, have not enabled him to bear with his banishment more meekly, nonetheless, the process of the play as a whole suggests that one person can permanently think himself into the condition of being a king, just as long as he's got lots of supporters and an army to back him. Thought, then, probably needs more than just thought. It needs some form of military and political backing. The individual is not enough to be able to grapple with the world on his own. But nonetheless, there was this abiding notion in Shakespeare's time that the individual was in some ways all-sufficient. And this is based on the idea that man is a microcosm of the universe as a whole. Man is like a little abridgment or epitome, that is, a little abridged version of the universe as a whole. The word epitome is used at the time to refer to a detailed index of contents for a book, and man is often thought of as being like a detailed index of contents or an epitome of the world. That idea is very commonplace in the Renaissance period, but actually Shakespeare doesn't use it all that often, partly because people were starting to be a bit sceptical about it. In Troilus and Cressida, for instance, I think he rather mocks the idea that man has managed to be part of every single creature in the world. But the thought still had some purchase, even in the mid-17th century. This is Sir Thomas Browne writing in Religio Medici in 1642, and I think he puts most beautifully the idea of man as a microcosm just at the point when the idea was beginning to lose some of its intellectual purchase. It still retains some of its imaginative appeal. So Browne writes in the next passage, "We are only that amphibious piece between a corporal and a spiritual essence, that middle form that links these together and makes good the method of man, of God and nature. that jumps not from extremes, but unites the incompatible distances by some middle and participating natures. That we are the breath and similitude of God, it is indisputable and upon record of Holy Scripture. But to call ourselves a microcosm or little world, I thought it only a pleasant trope of rhetoric, till my nearer judgment and second thoughts told me there was a real truth therein. For first, we are a rude mass, and in the rank of creatures which only are, that is, essentially mineral creation, and have a dull kind of being, not yet privileged with life, or preferred to sense or reason. Next, we live the life of plants, that is the life of growth, the life of animals, the life of men, and at last the life of spirits, running on in one mysterious nature those 5 kinds of existences which comprehend the creatures, not only of the world, but of the universe. So human life is imagined as encapsulating all of the various forms of other creation. And because man contains everything within the universe, his mind must surely have some purchase on the world, some ability to transform it. Well, when we see the idea of microcosm at work in Shakespeare, it's treated, it has to be said, rather less optimistically than it is in Brown, for instance. In King Lear, in the final passage on the handout, Kent encounters a gentleman during the storm. Who's there, besides foul weather? One minded like the weather, most unquietly. I know you. Where's the king? Now that I know you, this moment of who's there resembles the beginning of Hamlet, that sense of people recognizing one another in the dark is a powerfully dramatic effect. People, as it were, are sort of coming into being at these moments. But also, I think the phrase "I know you" here is more than just a recognition. After all, this gentleman is one of Shakespeare's rather random, unnamed, meaningless characters in some ways. Does Kent really recognize the gentleman? It doesn't much matter. What I think he means by saying "I know you" is that, well, yes, I know what you're saying. I understand you, because we're both in the same condition. Our minds are both like the weather and most unquiet. We have been transformed, our mind has been transformed by the fact that we are in this stormy, tempestuous world. I know you. Where's the king? And the gentleman responds, contending with the fretful elements, bids the wind blow the earth into the sea or swell the curled waters above the main, that things might change or cease, tears his white hair, which the impetuous blasts with eyeless rage catch in their fury and make nothing of, strives in this little world of man to outscorn the to and fro conflicting wind and rain. Lear out in the storm may remind us of the mythic image of Canute. Now, of course, Canute famously didn't really expect to be able to turn the tide back, was merely demonstrating to his courtiers the limited power of a king. But the image, I think, is an abidingly powerful one, because it reflects the idea of the human wish to be able to make the world do something by the power of our minds, and the recognition that that is fundamentally limited. In Lear, of course, Lear's own stormy state of mind seems to have produced the storm in the world, but the play stops short of insisting that that's really objectively what's happened. Lear, in his attempts to command the storm, is partly demonstrating, like Canute, the limitations of his regal authority. But he's also partly demonstrating a desire which I think part of all of us. It's an infantile desire to be able to control the world. And the way he manages this in shouting, "Blow winds and crack your cheeks," is rather like instructing a naughty dog who's already doing something to do the thing that it's already doing. One gives an illusion of power by giving instructions to things that will happen anyway. At this moment, though, the gentleman describes Lear in terms of the microcosm image, the little world of man. If one stays very still, the storm will stop. The little world of man is attempting to outscorn the to and fro contending wind and rain. Not so much trying to get it to stop, but trying to rise above it, trying to stay within the little nutshell of his own mind. He is attempting to control the world, but control the world within his own mind rather than the world outside. He wants things to change or cease. They won't, but maybe things within himself can change and cease. In the end, though, Lear's attempts to control the world are shown to be futile. The image of the microcosm, abidingly, imaginatively powerful as it is in the end not enough. It is in the end a microcosm, it is a little world that we are reminded of. The world of man which could conceive things well beyond our own limitations, which has an imaginative power, a desire to transform, to create those cloud-capped towers which Shakespeare imagines in The Tempest, but are ultimately shown to be a dream, like the dreams of Hamlet's beggars. The transformative powers of the world, of the mind, are limited. They don't in the end change one's objective condition. But does that make them any less valid? And I think that's part of Shakespeare's key and abiding imaginative force, a sense that the mind can transform the world, at least temporarily, at least enough for oneself. And that's part of the power of his way of thinking about thinking. Thank you.